The sun did not rise over the small village of Ufio so much as it emerged, a slow burning bleed of orange and red, into the vast pale sky, a daily baptism of fire for the land. It was an ancient ritual, witnessed by the baobab trees that stood as silent gnarled sentinels, their roots digging deep into the red earth like the veins of history itself. For Kofi, a young man whose bones knew the weight of this soil as intimately as his own heartbeat, this particular dawn felt different. The air, usually thick with the humid scent of blooming frangipani and wood smoke, carried a metallic tang of change, a foreign scent that was neither welcome nor familiar. It was the scent of anticipation and dread, for today the men from the city would return, and with them, the final decision about the land that was the village's past, present, and future. The land was not merely a possession to the people of Ufuo. It was a living, breathing extension of their collective soul. Every furrow in the soil told a story of an ancestor's toil. Every grove of cassava, a testament to a mother's care. Every ancient gnarled tree, a library, holding volumes of unwritten lore. The earth was their provider, their historian, their church, their identity. Kofi's own great-grandfather, it was said, had defended this very soil with his life during the brutal times of colonial conquest, and his spirit was believed to whisper through the tall, swaying elephant grass, a constant guardian. Now a different kind of conquest was looming, one not led by soldiers with rifles, but by men in sharp, uncomfortable-looking suits and polished shoes that never touched the earth with reverence, only with impatient purpose. They were the emissaries of New Dawn Agro-Industries. The project, bearing a name that tasted of false promise and plastic on the tongues of the villagers, promised jobs, progress, a bridge to the modern world. They spoke in glowing terms of infrastructure, schools and clinics, painting a picture of a shiny future that deliberately obscured the cost. But the elders, like old man Jabari, whose eyes were clouded with cataracts, but whose vision pierced through deceit sharper than any eagle's, saw the truth with painful clarity. This new dawn was a sugar-coated poison, a sophisticated scheme to displace them, to erase their history for vast soulless monoculture fields of soybeans destined for foreign cattle, a green desert where life once thrived. The promise of jobs was a cruel, calculated joke. For what use is a meager wage if it severs you from the source of your very being? If it turns you into a servant on the grave of your own heritage? The conflict was not merely economic. It was racialized in a way that was both subtle and profoundly corrosive. The executives from the global north, all pale-skinned men who arrived in dust-choked, air-conditioned Land Rovers, spoke a language of efficiency and scalability that felt alien and hostile. They looked at the villagers' patchwork of crops, the yams interwoven with maize, the beans climbing the corn stalks, the peppers thriving in the shade, a system perfected over millennia for resilience and biodiversity. And they saw not sustainable wisdom, but primitive disorder, an inefficient mess that needed to be corrected. In their eyes, the people of UFO were not stewards of the land. They were obstacles to progress, relics of a past that needed to be efficiently cleared away to make room for their version of the future. Their justice was a spreadsheet, their morality a profit margin. The color of their skin was inextricably linked to the power they wielded, a power that allowed them to dismiss centuries of ancestral knowledge as irrelevant superstition, to view the deep spiritual connection of the villagers as a quaint inconvenience. Kofi felt this racism, not as a shouted slur, but as a constant, low-grade hum of condescension. He felt it in the way the project manager, Mr. Harrington, would smile a tight, professional smile without his cold blue eyes, ever truly engaging with anyone, speaking in slow, measured tones, as if addressing simple children who could not grasp complex ideas. He felt it in the weight of the legal documents, pages and pages of dense English legalese, a language deliberately designed to confuse, to obfuscate, to disempower. The system itself, from the distant capital's courts to the international trade agreements, was structurally racist, built on the foundational presumption that their way of life was inferior and needed to be saved or developed by a foreign corporate hand. This was the modern face of an old evil, no less brutal for its silence. As the day wore on, the entire village gathered under the great baobab, the traditional place of meeting and judgment, its massive branches a canopy of witness. The air was thick with a palpable anxiety, a heavy blanket, smothering the usual sounds of children's laughter and women's chatter. Old man Jabari was helped to the center, his movements slow and deliberate. When he spoke, his voice was a dry rustle of leaves, yet it carried an authority that silenced even the wind. He did not speak of lawyers or contracts. He spoke of a deeper justice, a cosmic balance that governed all things. He said that when the land is wounded, the soul of the people bleeds. He said that a man who sells his inheritance for money is like a tree that severs its own roots, doomed to wither and die. True justice, he murmured, his blind eyes seeming to scan the faces of every villager, is not about punishment, but about restoration. The restoration of land, of dignity, of right relationship between people and their past, and between humanity and the earth. Kofi listened, and as the elder spoke, something hot and solid crystallized within him, a core of resolve. He was a man of two worlds. He had been to the secondary school in the district capital. He understood the language, the logic, the cold mechanics of the oppressor. He knew that fighting them with machetes and spears, the way of his great-grandfather, was a path to certain glorious, but ultimately futile annihilation. But fighting them on their own terms, with their own tools, information, networks, public perception, that was a different kind of warfare. A spark of an idea was born in his mind, fanned by the winds of ancestral anger, and a fierce, unwavering love for his home. Justice, he realized, would not be a single dramatic event. It would be a patient, meticulous, and strategic construction. He began his quiet campaign that very night. Under the faint glow of a kerosene lamp, he used a donated smartphone, a fragile link to the outside world, to document everything. With a curator's careful eye, he filmed the vibrant, teeming life of the village. The children, laughing as they swam in the river, their shouts echoing against the water. The women singing ancient songs as they pounded yam, their movements, a synchronized dance of labor and community. The men returning from the hunt, their faces etched with a quiet pride. He captured the intimate details, the intricate patterns of the woven baskets, the wise, wrinkled face of old man Jabari as he told stories to the young ones, the vibrant colors of the market. Then, with equal care, he turned his lens to the truth of new dawn. He ventured to the outskirts of the village, where the company had already cleared several acres for a pilot project. He filmed the barren, scarred earth, the exposed red soil already cracking under the relentless sun, the lonely, shriveled stalks of soybean plants struggling in the nutrient-depleted ground. He captured the silence there, a silence devoid of insects, birds, or life, a stark contrast to the buzzing, chirping, living symphony of the village lands. He focused on the erosion already beginning to carve gullies into the hillside, a visual prophecy of the environmental catastrophe to come. He reached out to a cousin studying law at the university in the capital, a young woman named Amina, whose mind was as sharp as a blade. She, in turn, helped him connect with a small, underfunded but fiercely dedicated non-profit organization specializing in indigenous land rights. They were a group of young lawyers and activists who saw in Yufu not just a case, but a perfect, heartbreaking case study of 21st century neo-colonial exploitation. The battle lines were now drawn, but the battlefield had shifted. The fight moved from the red earth of Yufu to the cold, shimmering digital highways of the global world. Together, Kofi and his new allies crafted a narrative. They were careful not to portray the villagers as helpless, pitiable victims. Instead, they framed them as what they were: resilient protectors, guardians of a wisdom that the modern world had forgotten but desperately needed. They translated Old Man Jabari's profound wisdom into powerful, quotable sound bites about sustainability and the soul of the earth. They juxtaposed Kofi's beautiful, life-affirming images of the village with stark, scientific satellite photos showing the environmental devastation caused by identical agro-industrial projects in neighboring regions. They framed the struggle not as a simple local land dispute, but as a microcosm of the global fight against corporate greed, climate injustice, and the erosion of cultural diversity. They identified and targeted the public relations Achilles heel of New Dawn Agro Industries. The company had a carefully cultivated, expensively marketed image of sustainability and social responsibility, a brand that was highly marketable to ethically conscious consumers in America and Europe. Kofi's campaign threatened to tear that meticulously constructed facade down, to show the ugly reality behind the greenwashed logo. Then, the breakthrough came from an unexpected quarter, a testament to the interconnected world they were now navigating. A young, idealistic American journalist, an African-American woman named Lena Wright, had been on a personal journey, tracing the obscure supply chains of the food on her own plate back to their sources. She stumbled upon Kofi's growing online presence, the photos and stories he was seeding across social media platforms. She was immediately struck by the parallels: the systemic injustice, the disenfranchisement, the casual dismissal of a community's voice and history. It was a pattern she knew intimately, though her context was the urban landscapes of America and the legacy of slavery and redlining. She felt a kinship that transcended geography. Lena arrived in Ufu not as a white savior from the West, but as an amplifier, a translator of struggles. She did not stay in a hotel in the city. She lived with a family in the village, sleeping on a mat, eating the same food, drawing water from the same well. She listened for hours, her recorder capturing not just words, but the sounds of the village, the emotions and the voices. Her subsequent article, published in a major international magazine with a vast readership, was not just a report. It was a searing, eloquent indictment. It masterfully connected the dots between the consumer choices of a shopper in a comfortable American supermarket and the existential threats faced by a community like Ufu. It laid bare the racial and economic hypocrisy at the heart of the project with unassailable logic and profound empathy. The article was a lightning strike. It went viral across continents. Overnight, New Dawn Agro Industries was transformed in the public eye from a bringer of progress into a symbol of corporate oppression and neo-colonialism. Environmental and social justice groups staged passionate protests outside their headquarters in European capitals. Hashtags like #SaveUFO and #NewDawnInjustice began to trend globally. Consumers started flooding the company's social media channels with angry questions. Investors grew nervous. The company's stock price began a steady, worrying dip. The faceless board of directors, who had never felt the African sun on their skin or heard the whisper of the elephant grass, suddenly felt the heat of a global spotlight focused intensely and unfavorably upon them. The victory, when it finally came, was not marked by a dramatic courtroom scene with a pounding gavel. There was no triumphant moment of a judge declaring the land returned. Instead, it arrived in the form of a terse, legal letter delivered by a bored-looking courier on a dusty motorcycle. New Dawn Agro Industries, citing a strategic reevaluation of its African portfolio in light of evolving market conditions, was formally and immediately withdrawing from the UFO project. They offered no apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. They simply packed their expensive equipment into shipping containers and left as quietly and imperiously as they had arrived, their Land Rovers kicking up a final cloud of red dust that slowly settled back onto the earth they had failed to claim. There was no cheering, no grand, euphoric celebration in the village. The relief that washed over the people was profound, a tidal wave of reprieve, but it was a sober, weary relief, tinged with the bitter knowledge of how close they had come to utter disaster. They had won, but the victory revealed the terrifying fragility of their existence. In a world where power and capital were so grotesquely unevenly distributed, justice had been served, but it was a justice born of global pressure and economic calculus, not from a fundamental recognition of their inherent inalienable rights. It was a defensive victory, a successful repelling of an invader. True justice, Kofi knew, the kind old man Jabari spoke of, was proactive. It was about building something so strong and so righteous that it could not be threatened. In the months that followed, Kofi's idea, born under the great Bob, blossomed with the life-giving rains. With the expert help of the non-profit and funds raised through a global crowdfunding campaign inspired by their story, the village established the UFO Ancestral Lands Trust. This legal entity, crafted to be bulletproof, secured irrevocable communal title to their entire territory, a document that would serve as a shield against future predators. They created a community-led agricultural cooperative that moved beyond subsistence, focusing on sustainable, high-value crops like organic shea butter, moringa, and rare indigenous spices, selling directly to ethical fair trade distributors abroad, cutting out the exploitative middlemen. The profits were reinvested into the community. They built a small open-air school where children were taught in their native language alongside English, and where the curriculum was a fusion of the old and the new. Children learned to calculate mathematical problems using seeds and stones, while also studying ancestral farming techniques alongside modern ecology. Old man Jabari, before he passed peacefully in his sleep, became the school's most revered teacher, his stories of the land and its spirits becoming part of the official syllabus, ensuring the wisdom would not die with him. Kofi never saw himself as a hero. In his own eyes, he was simply a man who loved his home with a ferocity that demanded action, and who possessed the clarity to understand that in the 21st century, the fight for justice required new, adaptable weapons. The racism that had sought to erase them, to dismiss them as irrelevant, had been thwarted, not by mirroring its hatred, but by asserting the undeniable, vibrant, and essential value of their own existence. The land was safe, for now, its soul was intact, and as the sun set each evening, painting the sky in the same fiery hues as that fateful dawn, Kofi would often walk to the edge of the village, feeling the good, solid earth beneath his feet. He would feel the whispers of his great-grandfather, not as a warning from the past, but as an affirmation for the future. The soil and the soul were one, and for another generation, they would remain whole. But he also knew that the work of justice, like the work of tending the land, was a constant, never-ending process. It required daily care, unwavering vigilance, and a deep, abiding love that was stronger than any fear, any greed, any power that sought to break it. The harvest of their struggle was peace, but the field required eternal tending,